balance, I think this is a very good cartoon that expresses the frustration of the kind of kicking the can down the road syndrome, which is what we see with the agreement that ended the government shutdown. So where are we right now? What can we expect for weatherization funding in the next few months? Let's take a look at the next slide. So we are currently funded at $68 million under the continuing resolution that was enacted at the end of the government shutdown last month. That $68 million is a hangover from the fiscal year 12 number, which was imposed by Congress, because as you know, at that time there was a lot of unspent Recovery Act dollars. So what is the forecast? We know that weatherization certainly cannot thrive or even exist at $68 million. The big question right now on Capitol Hill is, will Congress reach an agreement and the ongoing budget conference on getting a budget agreement? We hope that they will. If an agreement is reached, sequestration will likely be replaced, and that would be a very, very good thing. The Republicans do have a motivation to try to reach a budget agreement, because under sequestration, the cuts are equally divided between defense and domestic discretionary, and the Republican members are very, very concerned over the hit that defense programs would take if sequestration remains in force. If we do get a budget agreement and an end to sequestration, that will raise the cap of $986 million, which is currently for discretionary spending. It will make it far easier for us to get more money for weatherization. Let's look at the next slide. So despite the hopes that we have for a budget agreement, remembering those cartoons that we looked at a couple minutes ago, there hasn't been a lot of partisan conciliation, and we probably are looking at another continuing resolution, which will be starting on January the 15th. That's actually when the next CR is going to come due. So if we are, in fact, looking at a continuing resolution, that likely will fund the government through the rest of the fiscal year next September. We got to do something, and we got to do it pronto to get more money for weatherization, or else we are stuck at that $68 million. So what is our ask? Well, we all know that the program really urgently needs to get, as quickly as possible, back to the pre-Recovery Act level of funding. The average funding for the 7, 8, 9 years before the Recovery Act for weatherization was in the range of about $220, $230 to $240 million. That's where we need to be. Practically, and given the realities of the government by gridlock that those cartoons a minute ago reflected, the best that we can seek, and our ask in 2014, is $190 million. And thanks to the leadership of senators like Sherrod Brown and Jack Reed on the Senate Appropriations Committee, $190 million is the number in the Senate Appropriations Committee passed bill. Let's look at the next slide. So we want to get us to the $190 million. What can we do to make sure that we get there? And there are a number of specific steps that we're going to talk with you about this afternoon. We have less than 60 days to get us to that higher number. And what I'd like to do now is introduce my colleague, Bob Scott, Director of Energy Services, to talk about the programmatic impacts. Mike Gaffin is going to join us with the Office of Senator Brown. And Mike, when you are with us, please unmute and let us know that you're on board.
Thanks, Brad. During the summer, NASCAS called several state weatherization program directors and asked them what the outlook was in their state if the funding were to be $65 million, $68 million minus $3 million for DOE headquarters TNTA. And we also just ran some of the numbers. And running the numbers using $65 million was quite disheartening. I applied the funding formula to that amount, and you can see some of the results where the DOE allocations for 36 of the grantees would be less than $1 million. The admin for 45 grantees would seemingly be insufficient to hire one full-time manager or administrator. And if you look at the production numbers, it gets pretty silly too, that 51 grantees would be doing under 500 units, 39 under 200 units, and 24 under 100 units. You're probably aware that DOE did not use the funding formula the last 2 years, as they were given the authority to waive from the formula as part of the continuing resolution. And they considered the grantee balances that were on hand, and they allocated funds in an attempt to keep the network as intact as possible. And I suspect they would go that route again in 2014 if there's a continuing resolution. But it really doesn't change the picture very much, since the unexpended balances have declined in all but a very few states. So we all know that many states, but not all states, receive LIHEAP or some kind of utility or public benefit funds. Those funds are often significantly greater than the DOE funding, but there are also some states, some grantees, that are wholly or mostly dependent on DOE funds. Then there's a question of the role the DOE program and DOE funds play as both the basis and catalyst for the larger low-income weatherization program. We believe the DOE weatherization funding defines the National Weatherization Program network and is necessary to support its core capacity and its infrastructure. Without it, it's likely some states will not be able to support critical administrative functions and could even cease their weatherization program operations. Some states cannot use utility funds for administration, training, or health and safety issues, and may leave millions of dollars in utility funds on the table if they don't have DOE funds to support that. So I think we're seeing that the service delivery network may no longer be able to operate as in the past, but even if state weatherization networks are largely restructured, there are still many huge concerns and unanswered questions. First, there could be a huge reduction in the weatherization program service, leaving so many qualified, high energy use and high energy burden households on long waiting lists. Then there will be even more loss of skilled professional management and technical jobs that we've already seen, but it'll get even greater. State and local agencies may lose some of their capacity to leverage other funds without the DOE program. So we ask also, will state governments be willing and able to support the weatherization program if DOE weatherization funds do not support core administrative staff? Currently in 2013, we're seeing these problems. Right now, all the states are eking it out right now, but how long can we really expect that to continue in all states without that DOE funding? Will long-time and potential new partners shy away from the weatherization program? LIHEAP, utility, other funding is often dependent on the weatherization infrastructure, the rules, the standards, the trained workforce, and there is certainly some fear and some concern that they may turn away from the weatherization program if the DOE funding is not robust enough. And likewise, LIHEAP utility funds are often restricted in their use, so the need for DOE funds for that administration, training, and health and safety that I mentioned. Those of us involved in the weatherization program are aware that the program has constantly evolved and some huge advances are now underway. The Guidelines for Home Energy Professionals project, while intended to influence and strengthen the entire residential energy efficiency retrofit market, is very dependent on the weatherization program being the front runner. Can that project, along with the widespread standardization of technical advances, be sustained without a robust DOE weatherization program? And then, does the weatherization program network expertise and leadership role in residential energy efficiency become diminished? So if that low funding becomes a reality, at what point does the weatherization program begin to lose its relevancy? And I'm sorry for painting such a dismal picture, but wanted to point out and lay out what could happen at these funding levels. I hope and remain cautiously optimistic that we can influence the outcome of this more positively, and that the weatherization program can rise above this current political quagmire that it's in.
And Bob, you want to tell us about our next presenter?
That next presenter is Kirk Stone, the weatherization manager in New Hampshire. Kirk?
Okay, good. So I just wanted to say thank you to NASCAS for doing this, and we can go to the next slide.
All right.
There are really only two things that are facing New Hampshire, big problems, no mystery about that. The first is the inadequate number of dollars to sustain the program, and secondly, the timing of the arrival of those dollars is looking more and more unhelpful for our program year 2014. And so both of these are major problems in New Hampshire. Next slide. So the first problem is the number of dollars. In program year 14, we are projected, using the old formula, to receive about half the number of dollars that we did for 2013, the current year. In our program year 13, we have $1.1 million approximately, and the formula for 14, if $65 million is what we're looking at nationally, puts us at something under $500,000 for that year. And then, of course, you look at the 5% administrative take that we could use there, it comes out to something less than $25,000, and we really cannot run a weatherization program in New Hampshire for that amount of money. It just can't be done with the staffing that we currently have, which is minimal. It's also important to remember there are no state funds in New Hampshire. There's absolutely no state money at all in the weatherization program here, unfortunately. There is some home, the heating repair and replacement program from LIHEAP. Money is available to WAP subgrantees here in New Hampshire, but it doesn't cover very much, and there's certainly no administrative money in there. And the last thing is that we do have an excellent collaborative relationship with all of New Hampshire's electric and gas utilities, and there is a lot more weatherization production occurring in New Hampshire because of that than would be the case if we had only federal dollars. But those utilities are not a source for us for basic administrative support. Next slide. So the first problem is the lack of adequate funding. We can't run a program for $500,000. And the second big problem is timing. The program year 13 funds became available to us in October, so we're running really a 6-month year here from October through the end of March of next year. But the program year 14 funds will need to cover a 12-month period starting on April 1st, and we are clearly going to have some downtime. That's putting it lightly, I think, some downtime here. If those funds from DOE are not available by April 1st, and it really wouldn't matter at that point how much the ultimate grant turned out to be, if it doesn't arrive in a timely way, we're going to have to do something fairly dramatic here to keep going. Next slide. So here's what we're facing, very simply. The weatherization effort in New Hampshire would have to come to a stop in early April if the funding doesn't come through. The current grantee staff here in our Office of Energy and Planning would not be able to continue. We are trying to utilize, of course, some TNTA maybe for grantee staff here, but that doesn't go very far, as you all know. And that amount, of course, is looking worse for program year 14. So we are looking at a range of other possible things to do here, but the options are pretty slim. And they all present some significant hurdles, and of course one of them is time again. We need something, we need a solution. Something has to happen here by April 1st, or very shortly thereafter, or we're going to be in big trouble. Sorry it's such a grim picture, but thank you very much.
Well, Kirk, no, that's, yeah, it is a very grim picture, but thanks for that excellent presentation. You really lay it on the line. And that sets up Mike Gaffin with Senator Sherrod Brown. Mike is with us on the phone line here. We look forward to hearing from you now.
Hey guys, and sorry to tell you the truth, I haven't been able to listen to most of what you guys have had to say, although I'm sure I'll be repeating some of it. It's worth repeating. One, let me thank Brad Penny for inviting me to talk today. I think it's an important conversation that we need to have regarding the future of the weatherization program. One, from a health perspective, I think there's a few important things that you guys, that kind of the advocates out there can be doing for weatherization in the near future. One, I would encourage you all to contact your House and Senate members and telling them to support the $190 million Senate Appropriations Committee passed number for weatherization. That's $190 million. Obviously, this is all just, from my perspective, a powerful way to influence leadership and specifically your own members. To be frank, we have a lot of support coming from both House Democrats and Senate Democrats and a few House Republicans. What we need our most help at this point will be, Senate Republicans. We're going to need help, frankly, just on the Republican side of the aisle. As I said, the support from the Ds in both the House and Senate is pretty strong and has been for the last few years and will continue to be. Three, to be frank, the weatherization program is kind of on the precipice of dying due to the current funding situation, and we need to be able to kind of raise the profile, talk about what a great program it is, and how we can continue to, without the proper funding, that many of the services that we perform all over the country will die. And without the program, and kind of, you guys can highlight some of the things that you're doing in your own district or your own state. Those are my three kind of quick ideas, Brad. I figure we could have a little question and answer from you, about what else you're thinking here and what else we can be doing on the Hill.
No, that's great, Mike. Thank you very much. Let me ask you, maybe look into your crystal ball for a minute. The one imponderable here as we try to get a strategy for FY14 for weatherization is whether or not we'll have a budget agreement. Of course, no one knows. You read the tea leaves. But what's your personal gut feel? You've got a very good handle for what's doable. Do you think, is that going to happen?
I would say that there's a better chance of it happening moving into 14 this year than I've seen in a long time, and I've been on the Hill for a few years. I can't say with certainty that'll happen, but I did see the chairman of the House Budget Committee. I saw Paul Ryan on TV earlier today talking about how they're going to go to some traditional order, and we're going to create a budget and produce a budget. So you tend to hear these things over and over again, and you think that's going to happen. Having said that, we also heard that sequestration would never actually happen, and look where we are today.
Right.
So as I sit here today, I would give it a better than 50% proposition that it happens, maybe a little bit more than that. But as anything up here these days, I can't say anything with certainty.
No, well understood, and certainly weatherization would be better off, as would so many domestic programs, under a budget agreement.
Correct. There's no doubt about that.
Okay, well, Mike, I think we're going to thank you very, very much for joining us.
No, of course. Sorry. I look forward to doing this again. I appreciate you inviting me on the call.
Thanks for your time and your input.
Yeah, of course. Thanks, guys. Bye.
Good rest of the day. Okay, Bob, let's come back, and we have Ken Robinette joining us. Okay, Ken, good afternoon. Thanks for taking the time to be with us from Idaho, and we look forward to your perspective on the tough situation that we're facing.
Thank you, Brad, and I would also like to thank NASCASP for being able to join you on this panel today.
Good.
Slide, please. I wanted to kind of go back a little bit down memory lane just to kind of set the tone. In yesterday's DOE programs, during the ARA, we were able to bring on a lot of staff, provide a lot of training, and create those contractors and employees with certifications that we're using today. For Idaho, and I'm a rural cap in Idaho, in Twin Falls, before ARA, we had about 11 staff and maybe a half a dozen or so contractors. During the peak of ARA, we moved up to about 44 employees and about 20 contractors. We also were able to get our contractors and employees lead renovation certified. We also got people certified through BPI and through the John Krieger programs. That allowed us to increase the weatherization services, of course, to households. And before ARA, we were doing about an average of 160 homes. And at the peak of ARA, again, we reached about 390 to 400 homes. We were able to leverage our funding with DOE with other programs, such as utility programs. We had the LIHEAP program where we had the 15% added for weatherization. We also worked with programs such as the Idaho Community Reinvestment Corporation, which allowed us to go into mobile homes and do mobile home safety upgrades. Next slide, please. In order for us to leverage those funds, we used DOE as the template to set up those contracts for their standards and specifications, as most refer DOE as a trusted source for the contracts to be based on. With the ARA, we all was able to increase our purchasing power. And that included going from small purchases to bulk purchases. And with those bulk purchases, that brought a better buying power so that we could buy more material at a reduced cost. With the increased funding for the ARA, going from post-ARA, about $3,055, I believe, was the average cost per unit in 2009, we were able to bump that up to $6,500 and then address each home that we weatherized on a holistic approach. We were able to look at more of those health and safety issues and address those. Next slide. But the situation we're faced with today, and certainly it has been kind of a doom and gloom call today, but I'd like to be a little more optimistic and think that there's good things coming for us. We just have to work for that. But the way it is right now, with the state of Idaho, we're looking at about $450,000 to be split between 6 weatherization providers, our state association, and then, of course, the administration from our state office of Idaho Department of Health and Welfare. That's going to be difficult. We're going to have to make some tough choices. But I believe here in Idaho, between the CAP providers and our state association and state office, we've all been able to work very well together, and I believe we're going to be able to come up with the best direction that will provide the most cost-effective program for the state of Idaho. What does it mean? It means we're going to lose trained staff, trained certified staff. That is, without a doubt, that's going to happen, and in my case, it has already happened. I've lost a number of good employees that were what I would consider as maybe tomorrow's future energy hotshots. We're going to have less homes to be weatherized, which could mean less measures installed in those homes. And for 2013, my production level for my agency is 17 homes for DOE. Not a lot. If we didn't have our utility funding, if we didn't have the LIHEAP funding, it would not be possible for us to maintain a program at all. We may have to look at some of the SIRs that we're putting into homes and those that are allowed to be done over the 1 or greater, but have the lower SIR numbers such as a 1.2 or a 1.1, we may have to consider dropping those off so that we can get out to more households and provide a bigger bang for the money that's available. Our leveraged resources, we're going to be affected. And as Bob mentioned, a lot of the utilities, especially here in Idaho, we are set up where they will match part of our funding through their utility funds with DOE. In our case, it's a 20-80% match. So if we don't have the DOE funding to support that, we could lose as much as 80% of that utility funding, which is in the millions of dollars. Finally, history does tend to repeat itself. For those of you that may recall, back in the mid-90s, I think 1996, DOE took a 50% cut. Now, in Idaho, that was devastating. That meant we lost 3 WAP providers due to downsizing. We went from an average of 1.6 million to about 800,000. Now, for 2014, it's even worse than that. It's half of that, of the 800,000, but we still survived back then, and we became very robust. I believe that we can do it again, especially with the help of NASCASP, Brad, Penny, Bob Scott, and then, of course, our friends at NCAF, David Bradley and Meg Power. But most importantly, it needs to be part of us, all of us. We need to contact our congressional members, as Mike mentioned, and tell them the impact on this program with the reduced funding, and let history repeat itself with hopefully our funding being restored. Thank you for letting me participate today.
Ken, that's a great message, and you are totally right on. That's the proactive approach that we need. Let history repeat itself. And we are working collaboratively with NCAP. I'm glad you mentioned Bob and I talked with Meg Power. I believe Meg is with us on this webinar this afternoon. And we're going to be doing Hill Appropriations Committee meetings with NCAF. And we all have to work shoulder to shoulder. But Ken, I totally agree. We can do it if we all work very, very hard in the coming months. So next we have Dave Finney, the Executive Director of the Opportunity Council in next door Bellingham, Washington, next door to Idaho. Dave, thanks for joining us this afternoon.
Oh, okay, great. Yeah, I'm going to follow up on actually quite a bit of what, similar information that Ken gave you. But I was wondering, can you jump ahead slides? And I'm going to kind of do things backwards here. See if you can hit the curveball. Right there. That's good. Go back one. There you go. I kind of got my slides out of order here, but I'm just going to talk a little bit about, our perspective as an agency that I think is paying off for us now, but I think we have to pay more attention to than ever. And, of course, our primary goal as a community action agency in the weatherization program is weatherizing low-income households, working with families to help them get a handle on their energy bills and make for healthy, safe environments. But we had for, the past 25-plus years a real emphasis on leveraging, whenever and wherever possible, leveraging as many resources as we can. And then a big part of what we've been doing is really looking at training the energy efficiency workforce, because we know we are not the only game in town. And the more people there are out there who can do high-quality energy retrofits, the better, the housing stock is going to be, and that's going to benefit everybody in the community. So one of our goals when we created the Building Performance Center as part of our community action agency in 1997 was to help create a robust energy efficiency industry. And at that time we had crews, and we had good crews. But part of that was, the reason we had crews is because we couldn't get contractors to do the work. They just didn't really have access to the training or technical assistance that we've received from DOE. And of course, DOE is really the cornerstone. And so, so our goals are, really align with DOE and the low-income weatherization programs. And the bottom bullet that says help improve the overall quality of homes, it really should say quality and affordability of homes, because that's really meeting the people that we serve. Can you go back to back one slide to maintain capacity? All right, thanks. And so, one of the things that we've, really worked hard at over the years, and we need to continue to work hard at in the future, is working with the utilities. There is something in it for them, and there is something in it for the people that we serve. And so a real emphasis going forward, for us is going to be state capital funding. We've, this last year we were able to leverage about $10 million of state capital funding. We've had, it's varied, for the biennium, about $5 million per year. But we've been able to continue to work with our legislature, and I know that some states are going to say, well, gosh, we just can't get there, but I think you have to look at working with your state association of community action agencies, and it really has to be high on their priority list for the legislative sessions. And if we want to build capacity for the future, because that's really, for us, that's what's getting us through right now. The Weatherization Assistance Program from DOE is about 10% of our budget, but it is the cornerstone also. And so don't get me wrong, we think it is very important. But we've pulled together a number of things. We were able to put together a housing levy in Bellingham that prioritizes weatherization and home repair. And so, we continue to look at state funding, city funding, county funding. We've actually been able to develop a look-alike low-income weatherization program that anybody in our community can access. It's an incentive-based program called the Community Energy Challenge. So the funding for it is actually a little bit more than our low-income weatherization program right now, in terms of just weatherization. But we've worked with our local air pollution authority. We do fee-for-service work, and we've transitioned from crews to contractors just because we've been able to develop a solid contractor base in the community, which gives us a little bit more flexibility. So anyway, really maintaining capacity, and right now is a hard time to think about, gosh, if you don't have many resources, how do you get there? But it's an incremental thing. It just takes time. And so my last slide, which is going back one more, here we go, is really what Bob and Brad asked me to talk about a little bit, is our training center. And we aren't accredited yet, but we're on the verge of it. Or I might be wrong. I'm not totally up to speed right today. But we have a contract with the state of Washington to deliver the peer circuit rider program, training program. We do some work in Alaska with the agencies up there and the housing authorities. And of course we work with utilities, and we do a number of things. But what our training center has been able to do is been able to position us as the energy experts in our community. And that relates back to the fee-for-service piece. And that's really, over time, we've been able to diversify our weatherization program. So we're not solely dependent on weatherization funding. We do a variety of different kinds of work for different nonprofits, utilities, and folks like that. And the Building Performance Center, our training center, opens the doors for lots of other kinds of activities. So that's just kind of a brief description of kind of where we're at, and we try to look at weatherization, even though in a very broad sense, even though weatherizing the homes for low-income people is our primary goal. Thanks.
Hey, Dave, thank you very, very much. Great presentation, and the things that you're doing out there with the training center are really phenomenal. And as you said, that is the gateway to the entire residential retrofit industry. So let's turn, as Dave and Ken and Kirk have suggested, to the proactive side of the problem. Let's work together, and now let's talk about what we all need to be doing in the next 60 days. Next slide, please. So we have a meeting actually this Friday at the White House. And just as we have been sitting here with the webinar underway, we have received word from the White House that the new date for the White House event is going to be December the 9th. So those of you who are listening who are planning on being with us, recall we had a White House event scheduled for October 16th. It had to be postponed because of the government shutdown, and we have just received word the new date is the 9th of December. And so Dave Finney and Ken and others who are on our speakers list will be contacting in the next 48 hours. And we hope that all of you who are listening to the webinar who are planning on coming on October 16th will be with us in the Indian Treaty Room of the White House coming up very, very soon, December 9th. We have a lot of work to do. So with those meetings at the White House, we will be getting a much stronger signal from the administration to the appropriations committees that they want the weatherization additional funding, whether that's in the form of a plus-up, a budget anomaly. There are several different ways that the appropriations committees can provide more funding for weatherization. And we are fortunate in that on the Senate Appropriations Committee, we have a great champion in Senator Jack Reed of Rhode Island. Senator Sherrod Brown of Ohio is another strong champion, as is Susan Collins of Maine, who is a appropriator and a Republican. And another Republican who is an appropriator is Lisa Murkowski. And thanks to Mark Wolf, we recently had an opportunity to interview Senator Murkowski, and she is very, very understanding of the crisis that weatherization funding faces, and she is going to do everything that she can to get us up to the very best attainable number, and that ask, as we've said, is going to be the $190 million approved by the Senate Appropriations Committee. We also must get at least one Republican member of the House Appropriations Committee to request the additional funding for weatherization, and we'll come to in a minute some of the members that we are particularly targeting. And we have to be sensitive to the need to get an offset from which the increased funding for weatherization will come. We are hoping that it will come from some of the nuclear programs and other parts of the Department of Energy, not the Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy Office in which weatherization resides. The cupboard is bare, and that's going to be very, very difficult. So we are hoping to persuade the Congress to provide a greater latitude to DOE as to where the increased funding would come from. There are many, many programs like weatherization that have been hurt by now a third year without a budget and continuing resolution. So this is a very, very competitive environment. We face a lot of competition, and that's why the actions we're about to talk about are so critical. So what do we want you to do? We were asking you to contact your network, your partners and allies, to reach out, as Mike Gaffin said, to members of Congress. And one thing that we're going to talk about after this webinar is see if we can do an email blast to everyone who is on the webinar and other people in the network containing a link to senators and House members so you can directly go to that link and contact your senators or House member. We have to make some noise, as Senator Lisa Murkowski said. We've got to get weatherization back on the radar screen of the members. We are certainly not a billion-dollar-a-year program or anything close to it, so that makes it very, very difficult. The members you see on the slide depicted on your screen are critically important. Senator Murkowski, I mentioned the interview that we had through Mark Wolf just 2 weeks ago, and she is going to work very closely with us, and she's the ranking Republican on the Senate Energy Committee. Barbara Mikulski is the chair of the Senate Appropriations Committee, and we're going to work to set up an event with her in Maryland. Barbara is critical, and she critical to getting the additional funding for weatherization. She's also open-minded on the issue of the budget anomalies, so we want to remind her with an event in her district of what weatherization has meant in the city of Baltimore and elsewhere in Maryland. Senator Lamar Alexander, ranking Republican from Tennessee, Senate Energy and Water Subcommittee, Tennessee, very critical. Senator Mark Kirk on the Appropriations Committee. He is a more moderate or centrist Republican, perhaps in that moderate pragmatic group that we started talking about at the beginning of the webinar. Senator Kirk would be a very, very key member to reach out to. Congressman Mike Simpson of Idaho, Ken Robinette knows well. He is about to become the chair of the House Energy and Water Subcommittee, as there has been a change resulting in the death of a member on the House side, so that has created an opportunity for Congressman Simpson, and I know we'll be working with Ken, we'll be working with utilities in Idaho. He is in such a critical position as the chair of the subcommittee on appropriations that funds weatherization. Congressman Tom Latham of Iowa, we have Bill Brand, worked very closely with his allies, and we'll be continuing that effort. Latham is a very senior Republican on appropriations, as is Congressman Charles Dent of Pennsylvania. We have the Fiber America company located there. We have some other contacts in Mr. Dent's district. He is another one of those very few centrist Republicans in the House, and someone who we believe would be a very strong candidate to actually request the budget anomaly for weatherization. Congresswoman Capter, I beg your pardon, is the chair for the Democrats on the House Energy and Water Appropriations Subcommittee, Toledo, Ohio. Any of you who have any particular allies or contacts in her Toledo district, Marcy Capter is going to be very, very critical to what happens for weatherization. Those are just some of the members that we will be targeting. We just completed a round of 15 meetings on the Hill with House Republicans. A few of our allies from the network joined us for those meetings, and we're going to be doing more of those. And again, we need you to, we'll go to the next slide here, and we'll look at some of the specific actions that you can take. I mentioned an email blast, so you can reach out directly to your members of Congress. Those of you who have limitations as to what you can directly do with the members, please mobilize the advocates for weatherization in your area. We need everyone to be a part of this effort. As Ken Robinson said, we can do this. This history has repeated itself in the mid-1990s. The program was standing at the edge, as we are today, at the precipice of losing the program. And in the mid-90s, like Lazarus, it came back, and we can do it again. It's going to take a collective effort. And if you want to contact the Energy Legislative Assistance for the senators and House members, we're going to send a thank you email to everyone on the webinar today, and we will provide you, if you would like, with the names of the staff people, the energy staffers, or legislative assistants as they're referred to, for House and Senate members that you request. We highly recommend that you contact the state or district offices of your members. Phone calls, emails, you start getting 20, 30, 40 emails coming in to the member's district or state office, and they begin to take it seriously. I mean, that generates a report that goes to the boss, and that's where we need you to weigh in. This is the time to do it. We have only until January the 15th. We do have, for those of you who'd like to get further involved, a weatherization vendor association. And when we send out a thank you to everyone who is on the webinar today, we'll provide you with some contact email and information on that. This is something we created a year or so ago. We have about 24 companies that are working actively with us. And the idea behind the vendor association is to bring the tremendous secondary economic impact of weatherization suppliers and vendors to the attention of Congress. There's nothing that persuades more effectively than real jobs and real people sitting in the member's office, and the vendor association, with the employment and tax revenues that they generate, have been very, very effective partners. If you are with us today and you'd like to learn more about the vendor association, look for the thank you email that you'll probably be getting tomorrow or Friday. So with that, we have a good 10 minutes, and we can go past the 3 o'clock hour if there is interest. And the concluding slide, I think, just show us in terms of the messaging, the elements that we need to ask you to look at before we go to the Q&A. Again, the ask is for that Senate committee-approved level of $190 million. We wish it were higher, but that is the highest attainable number that we can expect in 2014. And believe me, given the competition we face, we'll be doing very, very well if we can get there. So with that, I think we will unmute everyone who's with us, and I'm sure you have many questions. But just to conclude, and sorry that the voice quality for Mike Gaffin was not greater, but glad we were able to get him on board. A few more action items here just before we go to your questions. The weatherization site visits are very important. We had a number of very good events on Weatherization Day, which Bob and Rebecca Stewart have recently disseminated to the network. Those are very good indicators of the strong support at the state level. We need more success stories. If you know, and you all who are with us on the webinar are well positioned to do this, particularly compelling success stories like that Murray City weatherization project in southeastern Ohio, where every home in a very small hamlet of about 450 individuals was weatherized, a tremendous story. That's the kind of thing that really gets the attention of members of Congress. So, letters to the editor, social media, cannot emphasize how important Twitter, Facebook, get word out there about the importance of the weatherization program. We are in the endangered species category. There's no doubt about it. So let's be as loud as we can to shout out everything this program has accomplished. Okay, with that, we're going to see what we can do to take questions. Jovita, let's see if we can unmute and see if folks who are with us would like to ask questions of any of the presenters except Mike Gaffin, who has gone back to the Hill.
Okay. And once again, you can either type in your question via the chat function or the Q&A function. And if you'd like to speak, if you could just raise your hand, we'll call on you and unmute you individually. We have a couple of questions that came in a little earlier on. The first was, what are the chances of getting DOE to move money into WAP like they did this past June if Congress doesn't act?
Well, let me just say, and I think Bob will expand on what I'm about to say, we were incredibly fortunate last year to get the reprogramming, and that came about through the direct intervention of Assistant Secretary of Energy Dave Danielson and the leadership of Senators Collins, Reed, and Brown on Capitol Hill. They pushed very, very, very hard to make this happen. We cannot count on that again. I personally think that the cupboard within EERE is bare, and it is our understanding that if it's a reprogramming, that the funding has to come from within EERE as opposed to get a budget anomaly, then the department has more latitude as to where they move the money from to make up the difference. But Bob, what's your perspective on that?
I agree, Brad. I think that was probably a one-shot deal. I'd like to think that our friends at DOE would do whatever they could, but I think their cupboard is bare, and they sort of, did what they could for the 1 year, and it's pretty unlikely they can do it again.
Rita, who else do we have?
The next question is it worth it for someone from another state to reach out to some of the members of Congress that were listed if they're not particularly from that state?
Well, my answer to that is that if you're talking about members of the Appropriations Committee, yes. I mean, if you're in Idaho or New Hampshire and you have a success story, or you believe you have relevant information for someone on appropriations, and we mentioned those very critical people. Barbara Mikulski, who chairs the Senate Appropriations Committee, Marcy Kaptur, the lead Democrat on the House Energy and Water Subcommittee, Mike Simpson. Those are people to reach out to. It's less valuable, I think, just to reach out to other members who are not from your state and not on the appropriations committees. The way this is going to go down, either through a budget agreement or a continuing resolution, it's up to the appropriators. And Jovita, why don't we send out the full list of the House and Senate Appropriations Committee members with the thank you for everyone who's on this webinar, so everyone will see who those critical members are. And the other thing we cannot overlook is to express our gratitude to the people who've really carried the program to this point. Susan Collins, Jack Reed, Sherrod Brown. Those are really the critical folks. There are others, but we cannot overlook in reaching out to other folks on appropriations. We want to acknowledge and thank the members who've done a great deal to keep us alive up to this point. Other questions?
There's several questions about the April 1st date. They said there was a reference to funding being received by April 1st. Are all states going back to the April 1st start date, or is that just for specific states?
My understanding from DOE is that they're still looking at that. There are problems communicating with Congress on these issues when there are so many different starting dates, and they're looking at balances of states' allocations. So I think DOE is looking at this, but I don't think anything is at all inevitable for 2014. And I also think that they're not even necessarily sold on going to an April 1st date, because later experience has shown us that seldom in the last several years have things been settled to get money out by April 1st. So I'm not sure where the department is on this. I think they may even be looking at July 1st, everybody on, or April 1st, but I don't think anything is inevitable for 2014.
Okay, let's move to the next question.
And I'm not seeing any hands raised, but once again, feel free to either raise your hand or you can type your question into the chat feature or the Q&A feature.
All right, well, we are approaching the hour of 3 o'clock, and so we'll wait here. We do have one additional, or if we do here before we conclude, we'll recognize who that questioner is. So in terms of going forward, where are we? First, look for a thank you email to every participant in this webinar. We had like 280 people who registered for the webinar, and so we will send follow-up to everyone with the list of the Appropriations Committee members, House and Senate, with our plan to see if we can do a email blast, possibly let's see if we can do it with NCAP. I'll talk to Meg Power about that. Send an email blast to everyone containing links to the House and Senate members, so you could just go right off that link to get to your House or Senate member. Timing is critical. We are approaching the holidays. The time from now to the end of the year is going to go by very, very quickly. Regardless of whether a budget agreement is reached or not, the current continuing resolution expires January 15th, and so we know that's the deadline. There must be new action to fund the government by that date. So with the holidays approaching, that's why those letters to the editor, and if you care to do an op-ed or social media, create some buzz around the weatherization program. This program has served 7.4 million homes since it was created in the mid-1970s in response to the oil crisis. And we really need to create the buzz of the success, the impact this program has had on the lives of people whose homes have been weatherized, who continue to receive lower energy bills for 20 years after their unit is weatherized, the tremendous jobs impact of the training that Dave Finney spoke of. That's the gateway for so many, many people who go through weatherization training and move up to the residential retrofit world. And lastly, the huge economic impact of the supply chain. That is something that we need to really emphasize, because that's jobs and tax revenues. That persuades members of Congress. And remember, December 9th, new date for the White House event. Please come to Washington. We will include another email link in the thank you telling you how to get in contact with us to attend the White House event. We'd like to have as many of you here in Washington as possible to create a very, very strong showing. It's great that the White House is devoting this time to weatherization on December the 9th. So with that, many thanks to our great presenters, my colleague Bob Scott, Javita Tolbert, who did a tremendous job with the facilitation of the webinar. And if there are no additional questions, do we have no additional questions? We will thank you all for being with us this afternoon, and please have a good rest of the day. Good afternoon, everyone.